just here to welcome you to the James Stewart Theater and the Lewis Center for the Arts. I'm Joe Scanlon. I'm the director of the Visual Arts Program and one of the sponsors of the event today. We're very happy to be holding this panel discussion here, and along with the American Studies Program and the Princeton Environmental Institute. So I'm going to turn it over to Ranger Jenny of the Urban Rangers in Los Angeles, and she will start the show. Ranger Jenny.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, without a microphone? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, let's try that again. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, on behalf of the American Studies Service, I want to welcome you to the Princeton Campus Greens to our campfire panel this afternoon. I'm Ranger Jenny with the Los Angeles Urban Rangers. I've been stationed in the Los Angeles Basin for about 12 years now, and I'm really thrilled to be posted temporarily here on the Greens as the Anschutz Ranger in American Studies. I was actually a junior ranger in the 1980s on the Greens, and it's really exciting to be back. We have three artists on our panel today. Subhankar Banerjee, and Jen Price, who actually hasn't arrived yet. They're amazing, and I'm going to tell you more about them all in a minute. But first of all, where are you all from? Here. Right around here. Anybody from farther away? Where are you all from? Pardon? Detroit.
What time period you're asking?
Okay, we don't need the whole. I'll give you one place.
New Mexico.
New Mexico. Anybody farther than that? Where are some other places that you came from today? Pittsburgh.
New York.
Costa Rica, New York. Okay, so lots of different ecosystems represented here today. Did you see any wildlife on your way to the panel this afternoon?
Yes.
What'd you see?
This morning. A deer. Tens of thousands of birds.
Birds. Tens of thousands of birds. Great. Okay. Egrets. Okay. We're going to get started in a few minutes, but just before we do, a few good things to know if you're staying on the Princeton Greens. This is a 600-acre multiple-use area. There are a wide range of opportunities you can find here for learning, studying, theorizing, researching, foraging, trailblazing, Nobel Prize winning, bickering, and arch singing. Travel on the Greens can be done by bike, car, shuttle, skateboard, dinky, and this is a little strange to those of us from the Los Angeles Basin, but I've seen also people tend to get around by foot. It's very odd. How did y'all get here today? Foot. Train. Bike. Foot. Drive. Car. Okay. Great. The dominant vegetation on the Greens is Hedera helix or ivy. Greens are also quite famous as a tiger reserve. There are about 7,500 tigers in the resident population here. It's a very distinct subspecies, Tigris epilepticus. And this subspecies is very territorial. It's very hard to get into the Greens. A few safety tips. Safety is very important to the Los Angeles Urban Rangers always, wherever we're posted. The trails can be dangerous. You want to be especially careful on the ones on the periphery, the ones with the numbers, like the 27 trail. This is also a major tiger crossing, and the tigers tend to text
thought I would just start out with a quick description of this project, which, by the way, was proposed very, very well before the Occupy activities, which is really interesting. But with a group of 12 students, Dan Wood and I will be creating this temporary colony on the New South Lawn in a 20-foot diameter geodesic tent on a large platform where we will be with students doing projects and activities that typically sit outside of the conventional academic activity here at Princeton and at most universities. Fundamental human activities like cooking, composting, dancing, eating, exercising, gathering, gardening, meeting, moving, napping, performing, recycling, socializing. Anyway, so look out for that starting in February. Let's see. I'm going to talk about 2 ongoing projects, and I think we'll each talk for about 15 minutes or something. But I'll talk about 2 projects I've been working on for the last few years. Each of them is serial in nature, in that each one is a series of projects that manifests. It takes a very simple, general, universal thought, and then it exists as additions in multiple cities, and it plays itself out in very local ways. The first series of projects is called Edible Estates, a series of public gardens for families to grow their own food publicly, typically between the front door and the street. And this initially started in front lawns, very specifically looking at this piece of land between the front door and the street, the American front lawn. And you can see these 2 images, I think, say a lot about this situation, and it says a lot about the degree of isolation that we've engineered into how we're living today. And you might think, if you know anything about monoculture, this is what monoculture looks like, which is always, as we know, in natural ecological systems, inherently kind of sick and not healthy, where you have only one, in this case, one kind of plant. So we think of this as a monoculture, but this is another kind of monoculture. And an equally toxic and sort of sick one, too, where only one sort of narrow activity is meant to happen. And I think it's also important to understand that you can't have this without this. This is this. They are completely connected, and because this is invisible and distant, sometimes the other side of the planet, it's easy for us to dismiss it and think it's something else. But they're inherently connected, and I think part of a lot of these projects I'm interested in is making visible what's been invisible and taking what's been marginalized as an industrial, pleasureless activity, for example, of food production, and making it a visible, pleasurable activity again. So it doesn't always mean going backwards to what we had. It's meaning recontextualizing it and weaving it back into our lives in ways that are inevitable given the infrastructure that we live with today and the kind of cities that we have today. So for the last 12 years, I've been living in Los Angeles, and what I've become very interested in with all of my work is thinking about how we self-organize as cities, communities, neighborhoods, and what we do with the cities, neighborhoods, streets, homes that we've inherited from previous generations, how we use them, repurpose them. So very quickly, I'll just go over these projects and flip through a lot of images. Here's the front lawn in LA. Here it is in New Jersey. Very different climates, very different parts of the country, but treated identically. And the Edible Estates project really started out with that kind of loaded situation of the American front lawn, which is a very symbolic space that is private property. But if you know anything about your experience with the front lawn, it's the most public, visible, theatrical kind of space that exists in our urban landscapes. It's where you tell your neighbors how you're doing and what you believe in, and also says how you feel about them. And in that way, I found the front lawn, wherever I go, is always this very loaded, charged space, beyond what you would think for such a modestly, sized piece of land. It looks fairly inconsequential here, but when you experience this street and you see it as the threshold to that private space of the house, you understand how loaded it is. And just the symbolism that it has within the United States. And so wrapped up in the American dream. Anyway, so here's the 12 editions of edible estates that have been done so far. Only about 1 or 2 a year. And each garden, the garden is only one small part of the project. I work with the families to plant a garden where they grow their own food. But then the real work begins, which is telling the story of what happened through photos and videos and the website and the book and talks and press that goes out to the world. So very few people actually experience firsthand these gardens. They usually experience the stories secondhand, and they exist sort of these models or prototypes. So I'll zip through images of these first 12 gardens. The first one in the geographic center of the United States in Salina, Kansas, planted on July 4th, 2005. And I only work in very typical living situations, because the point is you should look at any one of these gardens and imagine doing it yourself. So they're not complicated and expensive. They're the sort of gardens you could walk by and recognize that sort of living circumstance and then see that was done so modestly that you could do it yourself too, and it would somehow change the way you thought of your home in the city. And even though it was a modest act in a modest piece of land, your whole conception of the city perhaps would start to unravel as you understand all of our habits and behaviors of living in the city are based on, in some cases, antiquated kind of behaviors that maybe don't even make sense anymore. For example, we have front lawns because we've always had front lawns, but we haven't always had front lawns. It's really since post-war that they've taken off as they have. But when you buy a house with a front lawn, you tend not to question it because everyone else has one. So it's not really about lawns and growing food. It's about how do I want to live in this place now. We've inherited from people that have made previous decisions, but those decisions were based on different circumstances, which are constantly changing. So here's the first garden, usually with planting calendars that are distributed to the neighbors, signs to tell people what's going on. The second garden in Lakewood, California. This family already had a beautiful organic garden with chickens in their backyard. So this was an opportunity to take that activity to the front yard. And of course, once you're gardening in the front yard, even if nobody else in the entire city of Lakewood of 70,000 people grows food, they all have to watch them grow food. And they're watching them plant seeds and then harvest them in the fall. And even if you're not doing it, you're watching it. And to me, that's just as important. So this is not an advocacy project that lawns are evil, everyone has to remove lawns and plant food. This is a very public project happening in a very ceremonial, dramatic, visible place for everyone to watch. Is even a form of theater, really, or social engineering, because if you know anything about growing food, you know that everyone has opinions and ideas about what you should be doing. So if you're out there tending your tomatoes, everyone has an opinion about the type of tomatoes, what you're doing wrong, what other kinds you could plant, what your grandma used to grow, whatever. It's a very social activity when you're gardening in front. This is Austin, Texas, an apartment complex, and I really like to, each city I go to, identify a common living situation in that city and a living situation that I haven't worked with before. And this is a very extreme environment, so there's things like rosemary and figs and artichokes that will do well here. Each garden also has a headquarters, usually at the museum or gallery, that's commissioned the project. And I don't use gallery or museum shows or project as shows for me. It's not my show. It's the project show. And it's not really a show, it's more like a headquarters. It's a center for activity, it's a center to redirect your attention out, back into the city, into something happening there. So in this case, there was, our headquarters was this tent where we had weekly workshops working from, week 1 was compost and making dirt, and week 8 was cooking. So each week you progressed up the ladder through that cycle. Baltimore, Maryland, Clarence Ridgely, who you can see the compost pile waiting in the back as we're about to cover this front lawn. And you can see how simple this is. This is just mounded plantings, a very typical Native American planting strategy of mounding in this case, using what's available, using what resources are there. And I always take a picture to see who's there on planting day, and it's usually a lot of kids. And even if you invited kids the day before, I think the abstract notion of work for kids and gardening doesn't sound appealing. But I can guarantee, like every city I've been to, as soon as the shovels and the rocks and the plants and the dirt's there and people are making a mess, you cannot keep the kids away. They're all there, all day, every day we're planting. We're always surrounded by all the kids there. And this is what one of the gardens looks like after planting. It's not reality show garden where it's done and it looks, you know, like a garden. It looks like something you don't, for a lot of people, they don't know what it is or what's going to happen. And it takes, you know, the full season of 3 months for them to see, at least if we're planting a lot of annuals that grow very quickly, the drama of something going from this to this is something that's a real spectacle for the neighborhood to watch, especially if they've never seen this, you know, seen food growing on plants before, which in a lot of our cities is a real novelty to see food growing on plants. And especially for kids, and this is not just New York City, this is Salina, Kansas. The kids in the street in Salina, Kansas were freaking out. They literally, one of these 7-year-olds said, "I've always dreamed of a garden." Like the 7-year-old who showed up and she was helping us plant things. And I thought it was so touching, like in this smallish town in the middle of the country that you think of the breadbasket of the United States. And yet she's not surrounded by gardens. She's not surrounded by a complex ecosystem of food production. She's surrounded by industrial soybean and cornfields that you can't see, you can't get to, and that you wouldn't even want to, really. Here's New Jersey, not terribly far from us, Maplewood, a couple that had just moved from the East Village, not worried about pissing off their neighbors. And actually, the neighbors on the left, elderly German couple, were very excited about the garden, but on the house on the other side, they freaked out and they just hated it. And for them, they saw it as a sign of anarchy and a sign of the neighborhood's going to hell. That it was, things were falling apart. Because I think so much of the lawn and so much of our attitude towards landscape and outdoor space is one of control and domination. And I think it's a pioneer instinct in us. I think especially in Americans, I know it's true in Americans, that there's something in us that feels this kind of threat of wildness in some way. And I think a lot of my work is interested in finding ways to weave a certain element of wildness back into our cities. So you can see, you know, I'm looking for very strategic locations where the garden will be a shock, where it will be obvious that something happened here. So I don't do these gardens in places where people would otherwise do them. Here's a before and after, just a few months later. This is in London, in the center of London in Southwark. This one commissioned by Tate Modern. And this was a different situation. It was a communal garden for council housing estates overlooking this garden. Not private plots, but people negotiating among themselves this garden. And every time I go back to London, I check it out and take pictures. And all these gardens are continuing. They're all going because I put a great amount of effort, not just into finding the right location for these gardens that will really resonate, but working with people who have made a long-term commitment to it, who will be around for a while. So when I start and invited to a garden, or there's a possibility for one, my first question is always who? Who are these people? Because gardens are people. And where? And that will resonate with the place and have some meaningful impact. And the physical design of the garden is something that only is meaningful later in response to those couple of things. So they have a composting system now. This garden, these pictures were just from earlier this year. And then this was the headquarters in the Turbine Hall at Tate Modern to tell the story of this garden, and then you could stamp your hand with a map to go visit the garden, which is just a 10-minute walk away. And then Boris Johnson, the mayor of London, announced an edible estate competition. This was last year, because these gardens are meant to be prototypes. They're meant to be scrappy attempts to see what would happen if we tried this, for example, here at council housing estates. And in this case, as it got going, as it became more successful, other council housing estates were interested in it and asking for it. He announced this competition for who had the best edible estate. Later in New York, working with the High Line and the Friends of, in the New York Restoration Project, this was one of the later gardens, which is not a garden that feeds the people who are living there, which would be too complicated in the middle of the city for public housing in this case. But it's a garden to demonstrate how people ate from the land 400 years ago. So I worked with the landscape ecologist Eric Sanderson, and we only planted 30 sorts of plants that the native Lenape were eating from in that island 400 years ago. So the garden is really this portal back in time. These are the Three Sisters mounds, to see what do the plants look like that people were eating from, and to understand that under the asphalt of Manhattan today is dirt that could grow food that people could eat from. And then most recently, I just moved back from Rome, where I was living for a year at the American Academy, and on the roof there, I had a very scrappy rooftop garden, which was one of the latest prototypes, just collecting trash and empty containers and cuttings and seeds and growing food on the roof throughout the entire year, which you can do in Rome, growing things in empty bottles from the other fellows in these milk containers. There were 3 days of frost, so I brought them in for a cozy little hot house in my window, and they went back outside again. And my proudest day was when one of the cooks from the kitchen came up to harvest my lettuce for dinner, because my lettuce was doing better in my worm compost bin. And then right when I left, I donated the garden to a local community center in Termini, right, in the center of Rome, at an industrial complex that had been abandoned. And now the garden continues permanently in that space, tended by these, there's immigrants and unemployed people that use this community center. So the garden continues in the same spirit, where they collect whatever junk and materials there are and grow food. The latest garden was planted in Istanbul, Turkey, strangely on the roof of a new art institution there in a hothouse that they built. So the garden exists not as this as a one-off really from the series, where it's a community center, it's a gardening center where local urban gardening groups can use it for activities and projects. And hopefully it'll change over time with different installations by local groups, and then workshops with children. It's just recently happened there. And then the next garden will be planted in Budapest next spring, and there'll be 2 gardens, one at Bekele Telep, which is a gorgeous community in Budapest inspired by Ebenezer Howard's Garden City. So it's a community, a suburb designed for rural farmers who were coming to the city for jobs, and it was a community where it was built into the planning that they could grow their own food there and also create an environment that was familiar to them with these kind of this very particular kind of architecture that would be familiar to them. And then we'll do another edition at the Soviet housing blocks on the other side of the river in Buda. And I think just in a few more minutes I will, this is the book with stories of the gardens that came out in the 2nd edition last year with Metropolis Books. And in this book are essays by Michael Pollan and Rosalind Creasy and Will Allen, but there are also stories by the 8 gardeners of the first eight gardens with their personal accounts of growing food publicly at home, which to me was very important because a lot of my work involves doing things in real life out in the world and then telling their story at the same time. And I think, just in the few minutes before I wrap up, I want to just at least briefly tell about another ongoing series of projects, Animal Estates, which more gets into my background as an architect, working with, the basic premise of the project is this kind of empirical series of thoughts. Do we want animals in our cities, yes or no? If we do want animals, which ones do we want, and how do we want to accommodate them? So in each city I go to, I work with native wildlife experts and develop a series of, a very focused list of animal clients to work with, who will be my clients for the project. And these are animals that were native to the city that we might want to welcome back, that need architecture, that need infrastructure that would typically exist in a forest as dead trees or whatever else. So very quickly, I'll just breeze through these. The first edition was at the Whitney Biennial in 2008, where I worked with Eric Sanderson here. He identified 12 a whole list of species that used to live at the corner of 75th and Madison 400 years ago. He knows that for sure those species were there. And of those, I picked 12 that needed architecture, that needed accommodation in some way. And those became my first clients. So here's the installation: squirrel estate, owl estate, eagle. Plaques telling their story. The sunken sculpture court has a beaver pond, and these different estates for the animals told in these bronze plaques. And the beaver pond, I really wanted to be like a brutalist beaver pond, like Marcel Breuer, who designed the original Whitney. It's this great monument of brutalist architecture, and I like the idea of, whenever I do these projects, they respond not just to the local ecology, but also to the particular ecology of that art institution and what the relationship is to the city and the community. So in this case, it was a real response to the Whitney in that environment, and welcoming these animals not just into Manhattan, but into the cultural realm of the Whitney Museum. The bees, bats, and now these have been permanently installed at the northern tip of Manhattan. Regular events in the lobby. Oh, here's Ranger. Here's one of the LA Urban Rangers giving a tour of the installation. Ranger Emily. And I'll breeze through these. This is the Netherlands. And Portland, this is a snag, a dead tree, which was the inspiration for this tower, very architectural tower to accommodate 7 species in Portland, which was later installed in San Francisco in the Presidio. And then the last thing I'll show you is the most recent project, which is now in London at Arup Associates, the global engineering planning firm, where the latest edition of Animal Estates has been installed as headquarters, the Animal Estates HQ, Urban Wildlife Client Services. So when you go into Arup, you see this. This is the current reception area. Very corporate, very serious, very fancy. And now you see this. We've mirrored it exactly, an identical reception area on the left with scavenged materials. And we have our own logo, which is in a similar font. I work with Abake in London on this wonderful graphic designers. Animal Estates London HQ for Wildlife Client Services. So when you go in, you have a choice. Are you working with humans or animals? And now when clients come in, they're like, what? What's going on? And it's meant to be this moment where, it's a gallery to the right. But it's not a gallery, it's not a show. It's a new division of Arup for animal clients, and we're thinking of quite literally like that. So here's the headquarters. It's a place for events and prototypes on display, a conference table. So it takes all the trappings of a corporate Arup department with workstations, cubicles, conference center, but then screws it up in a kind of wild way so that you realize it's not quite Arup, but you're not sure why. And then we have 11 interns working with the 11 species that are seen here. And here's the hedgehog. So I'll end with that image. It's so cute. Thanks.
So I can just use that as. That was pretty awesome. It will be hard to follow that talk by Fritz with so much humor and just great stories. And Ranger Jenny began her presentation with talking about animals. And someone in the audience mentioned that there are like 10,000 birds that you saw this morning. I did too. I thought it was actually raining and I was sleeping. And these were these blackbirds that have, I guess, arrived today or something. And then there's those geese that, of course, winter here. And then Fritz talked about 2 things mainly, I guess. Home, well, 3 things. Home, food, and animals. And as it happens, I'll be talking about exactly those 3 things too. Hopefully I won't repeat what he said, but looking at probably from a little bit from the other side of things, or maybe the same side. What we'll do is first begin with imagining a scenario, because I am a photographer, I work with photos and text. And we'll begin with imagining a scenario, and here is the thing. Imagine a group of aliens decide to visit the photography galleries in some of our venerable art institutions, like the Museum of Modern Art in New York or the Centre Pompidou in Paris, and prestigious MFA programs in photography in such places as Yale and Princeton. At the end of their visit, they might conclude that the only species alive on Earth that moves is a species called Homo sapiens. That's changing with the kind of work that you're bringing in, of course. And that is sad. It is time that we ask the question, where are the good photos of the non-human world? I'm not talking about animals as objects or their actions as moments. I'm instead talking about relations. The relations that exist in the non-human communities and the relations we humans make with those communities. And that is the central question I have been attempting to explore for the past 11 years with photos and words. I just finished writing an essay with that question in mind for the 18th Biennale of Sydney catalog that will be published next year. Kind of photography's role in thinking about the non-human communities and our communities as well. But the question is, why raise that question? The health of our planet is in a great crisis, and I'm sure that most of you who are in this audience probably very well familiar with that. And one species, that's us, humans, are wiping out other species at an unprecedented rate. Species are going extinct, falling away from our earth like autumn leaves fall away from trees. We are taking away their home and their food. That's why it goes back to Fritz, bringing up this ideas back of home, food, and I'll be doing the same thing. Photography has an opportunity to engage in this moment of crisis. Instead of objectivity with subjectivity, and these are of course my opinions, instead of distance with closeness, instead of neutrality with opinions, instead of cynicism with empathy. I have only two ongoing projects. The Arctic series, there is one I have been working in the Arctic that began in 2000, and that's ongoing for 11 years now, and another one that began in the desert in 2006. Both series address two simple things, home and food, that land provides to humans and to all other species with whom we share this earth. And that's it, that's as simple as that. I call that land as home. As you can surmise, those two words, home and food, have a lot to do with sustainability. Unlike many conceptual artists, for me there is no idea in the beginning, just a desire. Both my Arctic and desert series began with photographs of death. And in the Arctic it was a photograph of one polar bear eating another. And in the desert, it was a photograph of a dead bird just right outside my home. And then death resulted in a desire. In the Arctic, I wanted to live with polar bears in the wild, call it a romantic desire that got, of course, shattered over time. And in the desert, it was a desire to know where I live. And then I began, then a combination of lived experience and thinking about it, and each informing the other and evolving in an intertwined manner eventually helps me to define a conceptual framework in which I work. But it is the lived experience that is essential part of my creative process. The brief time that I have here, I'll talk about a few ideas and share a few photos and some words from both of these series. In the Arctic so far, I have been working with three motifs that I have developed over the years. The first is color, actually, let me go back. The first is color, not as a medium, but as a motif. And it is a political choice. In the Arctic, in the popular conception around the world, the Arctic is thought to be a land of snow and ice and snow. And in the words of pro-development US politicians, the Arctic has been variously described as, quote, flat white nothingness, unquote, quote, frozen wasteland of snow and ice, unquote, quote, barren wasteland, unquote. And in the TV program 60 Minutes as, quote, hostile wasteland, unquote. I began to ask, can I make a photograph with white only? white and blue. White, blue, and brown. These are actually amazing. These are muskox. An atypical photo. I'm not going to go into it. It's a climate change related photo. But it's this one species that drop their calf. You can see one calf on the second to the right when the temperature is 40 below zero and the ground is completely covered in snow. It's the only species on Earth that actually does something like that. Gray only, brown only, brown and gray, white, brown, gray. I'll come back to some of these stories a little bit later. Or one story at least. Green only. And you can see presence of animals through tracks, traces, and so on. And humans as well. Green, white and blue, brown and blue. Color, I thought, would be a wonderful visual language to help us unlearn some of these intolerances. The next two motifs address ideas of natural and cultural ecologies and ethics. And instead of focusing on all kinds of wildlife, I have been focusing on only 4 things: caribou, birds, whales, and fish. My main interest lies in the ideas of local, regional, and global interconnectedness. And this was a political choice as well, because Arctic is thought to be a land remote and disconnected from our daily lives, like here in Princeton or anywhere, most of the places we live. On the contrary, hundreds of millions of birds migrate to the Arctic from every land and every water on the planet for nesting and rearing their young, a planetary celebration of global interconnectedness. On the other hand, caribou, whales, and fish migrate hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, connecting up numerous indigenous communities through subsistence food harvest, local and regional connectedness. But also, deadly industrial toxins migrate to the Arctic from every part of our planet, making animals and humans of the far north among the most contaminated people, inhabitants on Earth. The breast milk of high Arctic women in some parts of Greenland and Canada are scientifically regarded as toxic as hazardous waste. A planetary tragedy of global interconnectedness. So I think of the Arctic as the most connected land on Earth. In my cultural ecology photographs, I have chosen bent posture as my primary motif, another political choice. Industrialization brought comfort and ease, and with it, the bent posture, a symbol of labor, disappeared from our visual consciousness. And I'm sure with your edible estate, bent posture becomes a very integral part of that whole process. We primarily sit down. We sit in the morning and drink tea, coffee. We sit down and drive or take public transport to get to our workplace. We sit down in the office. We sit down in this lecture hall. We return home and sit down, eat or watch TV, and then we go to sleep. The disappearance of the bent posture from our visual space may have led to various forms of intolerances. And it isn't just harvest. These are scientists, ornithologists studying birds in the Arctic. In 2008, the United Nations headquarters organized a seminar called Unlearning Intolerance, Art-Changing Attitudes Towards the Environment. And I gave a lecture as part of that seminar. So I've been thinking a lot about unlearning intolerance. I'll share one example where I've used some of these motifs to address one of these resource wars, or one of the resource wars, I didn't even use the phrase as yet, in the American Arctic. Caribou, guichin, and oil. The coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in northeastern part of Alaskan Arctic is the core calving area of the Porcupine River caribou herd, numbering around 160,000 animals today. In April, the pregnant females begin an extremely long and arduous journey north over high mountains. That's the photograph you see here. They're migrating over the Brooks Range and frozen rivers to reach the coastal plain in time for calving. And the Gwich'in people of Alaska and northern Yukon and Northwest Territories in Canada live on or near the migratory route of this herd. They have relied upon the caribou for over 10,000 years to meet their subsistence as well as their cultural and spiritual needs. The Arctic Refuge coastal plain also is the most debated public land in the US history. Whether to open up the land to oil and gas or to preserve it permanently has been raging in the halls of US Congress for more than 4 decades. To open up the caribou calving ground to oil and gas is a human rights issue for the Gwich'in Nation. Toward the end of the 19th century, Plenty-Coup, the great chief of the Crow Nation, shared his sentiment with an outsider. And he said, quote, "When the buffalo went away, the hearts of my people fell to the ground. They could not lift them up again. After this, nothing happened," unquote. Jonathan Lear, professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago and Committee on Social Thought, opens his book, published by Harvard University Press in 2006, Radical Hope, Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation, with Plenty-Coup's statement. And for the rest of the book, he makes philosophical inquiries into that last line, "After this, nothing happened," with regard to strategies for cultural survival. Sarah James, whom you see in the photograph, a dear friend of mine with whom I work very, very closely, once remarked, quote, "We are the caribou people. Caribou are not just what we eat. They are who we are. They are in our stories and songs and the whole way we see the world. Caribou are our life. Without caribou, we wouldn't exist." Sarah's statement expresses the similar concerns as Plenty-Coup's. The Gwich'in Nation connected the fate of the caribou with the fate of the buffalo and the Plains Indians, with the possible sort of a future right to survival. And on this left-hand thing that you cannot probably see, I don't know where my glasses went, but it says, "Will the caribou go the way of the buffalo, or will you save our Arctic way of life?" And this poster was all over Alaska in various cities. And then there is Juxtaposition. This was an installation from Dartmouth College, where I was artist in residence in 2009. And in this Juxtaposition, there are large photos of caribou, which is that one nearly 9 feet high, with very small photographs of huntings are juxtaposed. And there are 3 intended tensions that I had hoped. One is of scale. To see a large photo, we pull back, whereas to see a small one, we get close. One of emotion. For many people in our post-domestic society that we live in, seeing migrating caribou is attractive, while seeing blood in a butchered caribou is rather repulsive. We have forgotten where our food comes from, and I think that's really, you're doing remarkable work, making it visible, like you said. History. American conservation is rooted in the idea of preserving pristine wilderness untouched by human, but human does hunt and live in the wilderness. Indigenous communities all across the Arctic depend on caribou, and this is another one. This was curated by Lucy Lippard, probably the only museum in the world where you can show up with your groceries and look at art. Indigenous communities all across the Arctic depend on caribou and reindeers. Today, 34 of the 43 major herds in the circumpolar north that scientists have studied are in decline due to Arctic warming and unprecedented resource development projects, including oil, gas, coal, and other minerals. There is much talk, actually very quickly I'll mention this. This is a photograph I took in 2001, but you might not recognize this, but this bear has become quite famous. This photograph has been published probably more than 100,000 times already, and it's one of the most published photographs in the history of the medium. And the reason is this. Senator Barbara Boxer, the first woman ever to chair the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, used the photo during a heated debate in 2001 And we won that vote that day just by one vote, 51 to 49. And since then, that bear has been appearing everywhere. And what ended up happening after she did that, my exhibition that was to open at the Smithsonian Institution in DC was censored, and that resulted in a Senate hearing, and then it resulted in a Senate investigation, and then very prominent senators, late Senator Ted Stevens, one of the most influential senators in the US history, effectively called me a liar. He said during a very heated Senate debate that Jimmy Carter and Banerjee are giving misinformation to the American public. So quickly I decided to become a citizen, and I did become, and became an activist along the way. So that's sort of a very quick history of how I became an activist. And some of that is written up in an essay by historian Finis Dunaway in this art history anthology called A Keener Perception that was published in 2009. And the cover was that caribou photo. There is much talk about restoration, including ecological corridors to connect up fragmented ecological spaces from Yellowstone to Yukon, from Baja to the Bering. In the Arctic, however, we are going in the reverse, fragmenting the ecocultural space with tremendous speed. There are resource wars everywhere in the Arctic, from Alaska to Siberia, with Nunavut and Greenland along the way. In Arctic Alaska, these wars have intensified since I began more than a decade ago. All that red is oil and gas leases, there is coal going on, and it's just everywhere. Right now I'm at the Institute for Advanced Study, just around the block over there. I'm finishing up this anthology that will come out next spring called Arctic Voices. And since we are on the subject of sustainability, I will just show you a small quote from a very prominent Icelandic novelist who wrote an original essay for the anthology, Andri Snær Magnason, what sustainability could be used, abused, misused, and in every way. The word, you might not be able to see it, so I'll read it. The word in English and Icelandic, I can't really pronounce it, exist as two domains in Iceland. And one is that Icelandic word .is, and the English one is sustainability.is. Both are owned by the aluminium company Alcoa. And then he goes on to talking about how just one corporation can destroy an entire nation's ecological fabric. And the title of his essay is Protecting the Apples by Chopping the Trees. It goes into many other things. I'll very quickly, if I have like maybe 3-4 more minutes, very quickly talk about my desert work. What I did with the desert work, because the Arctic I was looking at the far, desert is near. I basically walked in a 5-mile radius around a suburban home, so it is not really the wild as such. Suburban home for 4 years in a 5-mile radius. And the idea was to know where I live. And what ended up happening, it redefined the desert for me. And I'll share just one example with you, and this is in New Mexico. Imagine you live in New York City. And one fine morning, you awake to the realization that 90% of all the buildings that were more than 5 stories tall have been destroyed. You will hardly have any words to talk about this devastation. But I'm sure you'll walk around the rubble to make sense of it all. Something similar has happened in and around Santa Fe. Between 2001 and 2005, Ips confusus, a tiny bark beetle, had killed 54.5 million, 90% of New Mexico state tree, the pinon. Climate change in the American desert is very severe. A recent study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences states that the American Southwest may have entered a 60-year-long drought whose impacts might be so severe that it has not been seen since the 13th century. Under normal climate conditions, bark beetles live in harmony with their environment, laying their eggs in dead or weakened trees. However, when healthy trees become stressed from severe and sustained drought, they become objects of attack. The beetles drill into their bark, lay eggs along the way, and kill their host. Milder winter temperatures have ensured more of them survive the winter, and warmer summer temperatures have reduced the life cycle duration from 2 years to 1 year, and subsequently their numbers have exploded in recent years. But death of piñons is not a local New Mexico issue. Several species of bark beetles have ravaged forests all across the American West. Sometimes 100% of the forest have died. The black spruce, white spruce, ponderosa pine, lodgepole pine, white bark pine, and piñon have all been devastated by recent bark beetle epidemic. But this isn't a US issue either, or a Canada issue either. It is a global issue. Last year, scientists for the first time from around the world collaborated and published an extensive article on global forest death due to climate change in the journal Forest Ecology and Management. Hundreds of millions of trees. This, actually, I could get into that. This project is far more conceptual than my Arctic work and far more personally satisfying. So there are many ideas that started evolving along the way. But I'll just share one thing. Hundreds of millions of trees have recently died, and many more hundreds of millions will soon be dying. Now think of all the other lives, including birds and animals, that dependent on those trees. The number of those must be in tens of billions. What happened to them? And how do we talk about that which we cannot see and will never know? And that is the question I have been asking a lot. That which we cannot see and will never know. What role can photography or text play in helping us see that or imagine that? The local helped me think about the global, both in Arctic and the desert. Now my hope is to look at the forest of the global south because of this, what I got into. All three projects with one single idea, land as home, that provide home and food for our species and all other species with whom we share this earth. I'll return to the subtitle of this panel, Why We Need Art to Make Progress on the Environment. For me, art helps me to engage, and that's really the key. And the process of engagement helps me to frame questions that I could not have imagined before such participation. So it isn't really conceptual, it is more a participation. With all that, I work closely with indigenous and human rights organizations to fight for a sustainable future. Thank you.
On the chair, Wendy, if you want to just get that going around. It's not essential, but oh dear. Okay. That. And I just want to start out by thanking American Studies for bringing me here as the Anschutz Fellow this year. It's really been amazing to be here. It's been a wonderful experience, especially to come back after being a student here, getting education here and being very grateful for that education, and then coming on the other side. So thank Bill Gleason and Dirk Hartog, the acting director and director, who've just been sort of magic to get to know, and Judith First, who did a million things to make this panel happen, along with Candace Kessel. And every idea I have, they seem to say yes to, no matter how crazy. So I've been trying to decide, like, could I think of an idea that they'll say no to? Like, I'm going to ask for a puppy for my class. We'll see. I'll let you know how that goes. Okay, so the Los Angeles Urban Rangers are an art collective. We're a group of artists, writers, architects, urban designers, geographers, and other scholars. It's actually about 4 or 6 of us, depending on the day. And we use the park ranger persona to explore the what's, whys, and could-bes of our home megalopolis, and especially to equip people with the tools to do the same in places where they live. We aim to take the kind of wonder and curiosity that people bring to Yellowstone and Yosemite about how the world works, and to put that to use in the places where people actually live and often take for granted. We were founded in 2004 for an art show that Fritz Haig co-curated. So without Fritz, there would be no LA Urban Rangers, quite literally. And is the microphone good? Okay. And for that show, we created a logo. There's our palm tree and freeway interchange. And we did campfire talks, where there's our campfire on the left, on urban topics like freeway landscaping and toxic landscapes. environmental justice. And then we created a map of Los Angeles. All our maps look like National Park Service brochures. Here's the, I won't look at this in detail, but here's the key to our map. It's a little bit different from the other maps of Los Angeles. Since then, we've done a number of projects, some of them under the aegis of museums, some of them not. And those include, very quickly, our Malibu Public Beaches project. That's actually the 4 founders of the Rangers in our beach uniforms. And this was to show people how to find and use a public beach in Malibu. It's not an easy thing to do. Our LA County Fair project, we did guided hikes. There's Ranger Emily, a very key part of the fair, waste management, talking about. And we did a guide to the LA County Fair. In the past year, we've done a series of projects in downtown Los Angeles that we're excited about. This is actually a hike through the downtown financial district to look at the past and future of redevelopment, which we called our Corporate Peaks and Meadows hike. We're one of a number of groups, a sort of exploding number of groups, I think, that are doing interactive participatory public art events and projects that have really mostly emerged, I think, just in the last 5 to 10 years. These projects engage in sort of heated social and environmental issues and advocate, often gently, as Fritz talks about, for sustainable and equitable places and practices. There are a lot of these groups. I'll just show you, just to give you a taste of what's going on out there. A few of our favorites in Los Angeles. This is Fallen Fruit. We love these guys. They do nighttime fruit foraging tours in LA's neighborhoods. And a lot of the fruit that's if there's a fruit in a private yard that overhangs onto a public sidewalk, that the fruit is public. So they map out that fruit in the neighborhoods and help you find it. They have public fruit jams where everybody brings fruit from their yards and they all get together and make fruit together all day, make jam all together all day. Nadesha, you should appreciate that. She brings together people to make bread. Here's a group called Heavy Trash. This is a project where they built viewing platforms outside gated neighborhoods. Here's a parking day. This is actually in a number of cities, and you turn, a lot of groups go out and you can turn a parking space into, to do anything except park a car there for the day. And we love these guys finishing school. They have really, really creative projects. Here's one of my favorites. It's called Little Pharma Drug Run. First, there was a costume making workshop to dress up as your favorite pharmaceutical. And then there was a nighttime bike tour, dressed in your costumes, and of all the nighttime drug distribution sites in downtown Los Angeles, both legal and illegal. And they would stop at each one and play a game called Let's Make a Deal about drug trivia, and they would have drug paraphernalia as prizes. Was really to point out the sort of artificial boundary between legal and illegal drugs. So these groups are all really different, but I think one thing that they have in common, or what they all have in common, is I think they really make issues visible. They bring attention to these issues, and they also ask audiences to experience these issues literally, physically, on the ground, where these issues are playing out. And in many projects, in fact, and I would include, I think, Fritz's project in this as well. It'd be interesting to talk about that in discussion, but in many projects to really act out, quite literally act out more sustainable and equitable ways of inhabiting these places. So the point I really want to focus on in the short amount of time I have tonight is that I think these are issues that many people are addressing from a lot of different angles, especially in a totally messed up place like Los Angeles. You have a lot of policy folks, legislators, scholars, reporters, urban planners, landscape architects. Artists in general, I think, have really distinctive and useful contributions to make to these efforts. And what contribution, what I want to address is sort of what contribution in particular can these interactive, experiential kinds of art projects make. And I should say that some of these artists are full-time artists, but a lot of us are actually writers or urban planners and landscape architects, and we're doing this as a side project because we feel that it really allows us to engage the same issues that we're working on in our full-time jobs really effectively. Okay, so what can these projects contribute? And I'm going to address that question by looking at the group I know best, the Los Angeles Urban Rangers, and why I, who am primarily a writer, chooses to put on the hat. Other than it's really fun to wear the hat. It's really the only reason anyone joins our group. And I'm going to really do that, since I don't have a lot of time, by looking closely at one project, which is our Malibu Public Beaches project. Figure that out. What would you do if you saw those signs? So the issue that we're trying to address with our Malibu project is the problem with public beach access in Malibu. Why are we interested in this problem? Well, Los Angeles is not a public space kind of town. It's very much historically been a private property kind of town. It's very dysfunctional when it comes to public space. In California, all beaches are public below the what's called the mean high tide line. In LA, one of the most egregious violations, which is saying a lot in Los Angeles of public space, happens on the Malibu beaches, where private development blocks 20 out of the 27 miles of coastline. There are some access ways, many fewer than required by law, but these beaches are signed and often even guarded as private. So our project to address this had two components. First, we created a guide, our Malibu Public Beaches Guide, and this has a map of the access ways and all of the information that you need to use these beaches on your own, to go off and use them, including a taxonomy of the signs that you might encounter, classifying them as true, somewhat true, usually false, or false. So that was our first component, and then we had an on-the-ground component, our Malibu Public Beaches safaris, and we actually took people to the beaches ourselves. Each safari lasted 3.5 hours, went to 2 beaches. Here's our ranger welcome station / lemonade stand with Ranger Sarah. And then we had activities throughout the safari to enhance your Malibu public beach going skills. So we had sign watching, figure out which of these signs actually are legal or right, very few of them, or either. We had a public easement potluck in front of that beautiful Richard Meyer house. We had an access way hunt. This was a no-kill hunt. Nobody ever found that one. That one's impossible to find. We had a campfire song. And we had our central activity called Trailblazing the Public-Private Boundary. And this was about, there are a lot of public easements on the dry sand, and on some beaches it's like 2/3 of the properties have public easements that everyone can use on the dry sand. And they're completely unmarked, and no one even knows that they exist, much less where they are. And then the Coastal Commission has created maps for a couple of these beaches, which no one knows exists either. So we divided our group into groups, and each one had to use their map to find and mark out, literally measure out. We gave them a little kit with a measuring tape, some stakes, their public easement, and then we gave them some props each group had to practice a different stereotypic beach behavior on their easement and create a freeze frame activity of that behavior to perform for the rest of the group. Here's one of our sunbathing groups, the woman in the beautiful orange sun hat's actually the director of the public access program for the State Coastal Commission, doing our sunbathing, one of our sunbathing groups. Here's one of our frisbee groups. This group decided to show how to retrieve a frisbee if you're on a property with an easement and your frisbee goes onto a property without an easement. Here's practicing yoga on our public beaches. You can see the people who live next door to the public beaches behind them. Sandcastle building. They built this huge peace sign in 8 minutes. I don't know how they did it. Wildlife watching and reading trashy magazines. Always our most popular one. Okay, so that's our project, and I think it was really useful first as an interactive experiential project. You know, a lot of people have been working on public beach access. There's a lot of legal activity there. Everybody's suing everybody down there constantly. So the state has a lot of activity going on, legal activity going on there, regulation. There's a nonprofit down there that works to create new access ways. I was writing op-eds about this. I was working on this as a writer. That's actually the work that this is based on. But no one had actually taken people to the beaches and showed them where the public lands are and how to use them. You can't have public beaches unless the public is on them, really. That's really the most useful way to make them public. So I think getting people to these beaches and on the ground was really useful. But we didn't just take people to the beaches. We took them as urban rangers. We put on our hats to take people to the beaches. This is an art project. And so we didn't just take people to the beaches. We were essentially trying to create a kind of new narrative and a story about this place that people could inhabit. And we asked people to inhabit and experience not just this actual place, but also the new kind of story that we were trying to frame this place with and this activity with. And I think all of the groups, like Fallen Fruit and the others, are doing some version of this kind of storytelling. The way the Rangers do this kind of storytelling is with the Ranger character and the connotations of the Ranger character. The Park Ranger is a really iconic American character. It has really well-known qualities that people, not everybody, it is a culturally specific character, which I'm happy to talk about in discussion, but a lot of people will recognize these characters immediately when they see the hat, and immediately see, like when we're walking around in our Ranger uniforms, people are constantly asking us for directions to places. So we're using these qualities, basically exploiting them really to kind of tell the kind of new story about the beaches. These are places that have been characterized by a lot of tension and conflict, and where the public beach has felt very private for many decades. Just to look at some of the qualities that we're using. Park rangers are really, I love this picture, so I'm going to show it again. Park rangers are really all about helping people go to great, cool places and find them and explore them, and we're knowledgeable and you can trust us. If you see that hat with a ranger, you can really feel secure that if we tell you where the public lands are, you can actually trust us and feel comfortable and that we know what we're talking about. So we use that quality in this project. A ranger is also really friendly and non-confrontational. There's our boy rangers, Ranger Ron and Ranger Nick. The hat really puts you at ease. We're very, very friendly. We don't confront everybody. Even when people yell at us on the beaches, we stay cool. If I don't think I can stay cool, I send one of these guys to do it. They're much better at that. And again, these are very contentious places, and what this allowed us to do was really make people feel comfortable on their own beaches, which has not been the case down there in general, and to just do what you're supposed to do on the beach, which is to have a really fun day on the beach. So that's another quality. The Rangers are also the guardians of America's great public spaces. We're only posted on the public lands, and this allowed us to do a really key shift in the story that people tell about these places. Generally, people talk about these, even I hear the Coastal Commission will talk about these as the private beaches that include public land and that the public is allowed to use parts of. So we didn't even engage in the debates about whether the public should be on the public land that's next to the private lands. We just said, hey, I mean, why would we be on private lands? We're rangers, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. So we just said, hey, come join us, come have fun on the public beaches. And we just tried to ignore the private lands as much as possible. And we didn't call those guys the homeowners. We called them, oh, those are the people that live next door to the public beaches. We're just going to hang out here on the public beaches. So really, I think, able to sort of semantically do something really key, which is to define these as public beaches. One more quality, which we didn't really use that much here, but it's actually really intrinsic to our practice, is that the park ranger is an expert on nature. I think the ranger character in general, what we do in our projects is we use that character to see nature in the city, to really explore, to get people to explore the places they live, to ask questions about those places, to explore and really see and make visible their connections to nature and to each other, and to make public spaces feel public. So we're not just giving people information and getting people out to those spaces, but we're really trying to get people to literally, on the ground, experience these places anew and experience new stories about these places, some of which will come from the people themselves. So that's kind of the method to our madness. And I think other groups have their own methods and their own madness, but I really see all of us as storytellers that we're creating new stories about and in places. And I think storytelling is a really, really essential tool for all this stuff, this great work that Fritz and Subhankar are talking about that we all want to get done, because to change the way people think, you really have to change the way that they tell stories about places and about people. So I'm going to do this really quick. This is the handout, but I'm going to fly through it because I want to leave lots of time for discussion. Just one more project. This is our LA River ramble. This was for a series of programs for MoCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art, that last summer. And the city's trying to revitalize it, but they also won't let you go to certain sections. It's considered to be trespassing. They sort of mark them off as dangerous and horrible. But it's very difficult to revitalize the river if you don't have public support. And it's very hard to get public support if you can't bring people to it and say, here's your river, here it is, it exists, you don't even know it's here, and let people get attached to it. So our LA River Ramble, we actually got a permit from the city to take people. It was actually a nighttime event. This was the early part, before it got dark. The event drew about 800 people, so we really turned going to the river into a kind of party, kind of social event. We had a water bar, which is on the handout, where we had DWP waters and bottled waters. And then we had hikes to the river. And in order to do the hike, you had to sign the city permit. This is what it looks like. It basically says, you know, you could die at any moment if you go to the river. And then you had to sign our permit, which is our backcountry permit, that said things like, I understand that I'm entering a major public space. I understand that I can ask my federal, state, et cetera, you know, to open this essential public space for public use. So again, we're trying to make the river visible, see it, experience it differently, and experience a new story about this really essential river in Los Angeles. One last thing, a lot of people on the LA River Ramble asked us, they said, well, can I bring my friends back here? Because now I have a permit. And we would love nothing more than to start getting calls from the LAPD saying that people were going down to the river with their permit, their backcountry permit. But that just points out there's actually a lot of slippage in our project of the LA Urban Rangers. It's actually not unusual for people to not really know whether we're real rangers, whether we're fake rangers. They think we work for the city, they think we work for the county. They don't always see us as an art performance. They don't see us as storytellers. They just see us as real rangers, just like I think a lot of people see Fritz as maybe as a gardener. This would be great to talk about, or fallen fruit, just as people who show you where the fruit trees are. And that's fine with us. In fact, we kind of enjoy that slippage. And then just to end, a favorite example of that slippage is with the Malibu Public Beaches project. The first summer we did this, we thought about asking the real state park rangers, one of the state parks agency, for funding. We thought, I think they might shut us down. They're not going to like what we do. They're going to think we're making fun of us. So we did the first summer, and then we got a note from the head of the State Parks Agency saying, hey, we love what you're doing. You guys want some funding? So we said, sure. So we did it that next summer, and then the next summer we're funded by the State Coastal Conservancy. And then the State Parks Agency asked us if we would, both agencies started using our guide at their meetings, at their board meetings, and handing it out to the public. And then the State Parks Agency hired us to consult with them because they wanted to develop their own programs on the beaches. So like the real rangers were hiring the fake rangers to consult. And this is a really wonderful moment for us. It's really kind of our dream that this new story we're telling could help really institutionalize this kind of change. I'm just going to quote Fritz. I don't know where I came across this, but I always quote you. And it said once, the best place to be radical is at the center. And I'm just going to end with that. So thank you very much.
What's up? Oh, questions?
First maybe we should just take about, we don't have that much time. We'd like to go a little over, just for those of you who can stay, but feel free to disperse when you need to. But maybe we should just give each other a little time, and maybe take 5 minutes at the most.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that you said I wanted to respond to, because there's so much in what you're doing that resonates, I think, with what I believe in. Can people hear me?
No, I was just going to.
Your water.
Thanks.
And I think this idea of, for example, with my work, I'm really interested in I mean, a lot of my work is commissioned by museums and exists in art institutions, and it's supported by them. But I'm really interested in the contemporary art world as a platform from which the work radiates. It's a platform, it's a source for the work. It's not a destination for the work. And I think it's a really important distinction, because I think maybe for a lot of young artists, there's so much focus on entering into it and being a part of it. And I think when you're young, that's the focus. But I think there needs to be an important shift where once you're in it, you realize, no, this isn't it. This isn't the center. This is just the source. And I think that's very clear with your work as well, that a lot of times the source isn't even evident anymore. You're not even aware where the work came from, even to the point where what I'm really very adamant about a lot of my work where people's first experience of it is without even the frame of art. You don't even come with that, like, okay, I'm getting my art armor on, I'm gonna get ready to see art, and I'm like, this is art. You first experience the story, you first experience the essence of whatever it is, and only later, maybe, does the whole process of that experience with art come through. And I think that's so exciting to hear. I wasn't even aware of your relationship with the Coastal Commission and the Park Service. That's super exciting, and I love that idea that cycle has happened. And I think with me it's happened in other interesting ways as well, because my background's in architecture and I am a gardener, but my work exists, I'm in the art world, I make art, I work with museums and things like that, though I go to great lengths to extend outside of that. So I do an enormous amount of travel and lecture, but only maybe 50% of that is in the art world. Like it's for gardeners, it's for,
Would you ever consider doing an edible estate project without a museum base?
Oh, I have. Yeah, there have been. It just depends on, it needs proper funding and it needs proper local support and things like that. But I think the best example that, I had a similar example where I was invited to be on the Martha Stewart show on TV. And it was because the book came out, and it's a gardening book, and it's about growing food at home, so why shouldn't I be on that show? And I think, like talking to her on TV about the gardens, on one hand I felt like, yeah, this is who I want to talk to, this is my audience. I'm more interested in that audience than I am in a commercial art gallery, because the people going into commercial art gallery are coming, they're already self-selecting and very narrow, like I'm interested in that broad audience. But also I felt a little bit like an imposter, because she just, who knows what she thinks about what I do. Like in the commercial break, she's like, what do you do again? It's like, well, my background's in architecture, but I don't know. But I felt like it was kind of like a Trojan horse situation where she had no idea what I was, like growing food at home, and that's all we need to know. And that's fine.
Whenever we start a project, we have our group together, and we're doing an event, and we have our group, and we start with this whole shtick about, hey, I'm ranger jetting, and you can immediately tell who knew what they were getting into and who didn't. Because there's you look around, some of these people are just going, what?
I think, a couple of things you mentioned, that I think both of you mentioned, is the role of stories in making things visible is becoming, I see more and more becoming really prominent. And that's something hard to talk about in an art world or contemporary art world, is talking about stories, which immediately brings back the idea of narrative. And so that part, I think, is very crucial, because one of the things that at least I'm working with is really retelling stories. And the desert work is actually more relevant for that, because the art thing is always a big thing out there, a lot of political issues involved, and it gets very politicized very quickly. But in the desert work, I had the luxury to step away from all of that, even though I showed something that is very contemporary politics with the climate change. But most of the project was not that. Most of the project was just walking, looking, thinking, raising new questions. And like I mentioned, that is the stories help us raise questions that otherwise we might not think about. And I'll give you just an example. Is almost 2 years I just photographed a simple species called cholla cactus, which is of course not much of interest to any artist, even though it has been photographed by a couple of artists before. But I raised a simple question, what do you think of a cholla? And my neighbor might say, I love the scarlet bloom on the cholla. And another neighbor would say, I hate these ugly plants and have removed them all from my property. Then I would ask an anthropologist, and the answer might be, these are the chollas are indicator species by which we recognize Native American habitation. And it is a plant of the disturbed earth, meaning wherever the soil has been disturbed, chollas will thrive. Then I would ask a rancher, and I have friends who are ranchers, and they would say, well, we removed all chollas from our 30,000-acre ranch, because chollas compete with grass. That's one thing which the cattle should eat, and or during times of drought, the cattle would eat the chollas and would die from it. And then I would ask, let's say, Native American, Puebloan in in our food for 10,000 years. Few birds have more calcium than a glass of milk. And then I would ask someone who does not have a voice like a bird. And it comes back to the idea of home. What do you think of a choice? And the bird's answer, if it had a voice, would be, this is where I'm born. So I think this idea of stories is not just retelling a story as a narrative. It's the stories is a way to raise these new questions that I think we are, and be in ambiguity. One of the things I loved what you mentioned in your talk was this idea of ambiguity, and you use the word slippage. And I love dealing with words. So slippage, but it's ambiguity, that your persona, that you're bringing in so much this thing, and kind of you're fooling the system to further a cause, whatever that cause might be. So I guess these are like strategies, right? So, yeah, so I think stories have a very important role. Rethinking our time.
We should probably just.
Yeah, if there are any questions.
I guess I can put my hat back on and take questions. Yeah.
I have one for each of you, and I just have to say, this was great.
Okay.
Someone told me I should come here, and you three are fantastic. The first question is for Jenny. You came here and you quickly identified tigers and dexters. I just want to know if you noticed the two tigers in front of Palmer Stadium.
Yes, they're quite frightening.
And would you like to make them, which I'm not sure, but did you think that the original intention of the artist was to use them as frames with appropriate areas? Or would you like them to be?
Yeah, I tended only to put some thought into the real tiger and to the live tigers on campus. I don't really
Well,
know.
I would like to start campaigning over
Yeah.
the idea.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea.
I just wanted to
I think we should do that with all the sculptures on campus. And I would just say, there are a lot of people who want to ask questions, so maybe if you could ask one more, and then we can come back to you if you have more.
Okay. Chris, you're going to move into the dinky area. Are you aware of the controversy of the private-public, end of the tracks and the need for some sort of reassessment of the vegetation that is the barrier between the train and the park that you're about to
Well,
inhabit?
we're just going to be in a very focused, specific area. I don't even know how you would identify them.
New South.
Yeah, New South, but on the side of the path, north side of the path, towards the dorms. It's muddy. Okay, we have. I don't know what we're in for yet, but we're gonna. I think there's a few potential students in here, so we'll.
Long between Solomon and
Yeah.
Right, but there is a green barrier
Yeah.
that blocks off.
Well, visit us
I will visit.
in February when we move in, and we'll start to encounter all of that,
Really nice.
all those things together. Yeah, we'll be. Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. But no, I'm not aware of those things, but we'll find out soon enough.
Stacy.
Stacey.
This is so amazing. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to me how much you use language, and where you were talking about narrative and stories, how much you use languages that we use in theater or in performance studies. And I was curious about the degree to which you identify, and I know you all avow and disavow your relationship to visual art histories and architecture and the disciplines, I guess, in which your school, and you're also a writer. But what do you, are you theater artists? Are you performance artists also? Or rather than?
I mean, we think of ours as one thing you could say is that we do performance art. But for myself, I have to say, I mean, I just had my students turn in visual art projects, and I just thought I should not be I'm not qualified to evaluate. I mean, I'm an accidental artist. I accidentally founded this collective, literally. And so I'm really just catching up to what it even means to be in the art world and what traditions I am accidentally tapping into. But I think the two of you are probably less accidental artists.
No, not really. I am an accidental too, because I come from a different background. My graduate degree was in theoretical physics, but then I moved to art because of many things from my childhood and all of that. But I still am sort of an outsider to the art world because I spend very little time in the so-called the art world. I kind of avoid as much as I can. And most of my time is actually in the activist world or in the writing or stories and all of that. So it's kind of, or policy, public policy. I spend a lot of time on issues of public policy. So whenever I get a chance to, the way these, the exhibitions that gets used, or I'm not abusing it, but an exhibition happens and that brings in press, media, whatever, and we raise the awareness. But that's what I'm interested in, is to raise awareness and engaging people to rethink their own space, not just about some remote wild place, but what connection this particular place might have with that space and all of these issues of what are food. So I am sort of a kind of a outsider still. I mean, even though that's where I make my living, but.
And I think your question was also about the performative aspects of the work, and I know that's really important, not just in the two examples I gave, but a lot of the other projects that I do that involve even dance and movement. But I think I've become very interested in general, and I'm not interested in the idea of the virtuosic performance of something that you've practiced in discrete, hidden places and made it perfect to then trot out. But instead, reveal the daily activity of moving towards something, a practice. And gardening is like that. Gardening is the daily activity that's moving you towards what? There's no final goal. And it's the same thing I'm interested in all of the work. But I think when it comes to me personally, like when I do talks, and I do a lot of talks, not unlike the talk that I did tonight, but it's always just, like I try as much as possible. I've always thought, since I do so many lectures, I'm always like, gosh, I wonder if I should rethink the way I do my talks or presentations, but ultimately I always feel like it's important to have the most natural, conversational way of presenting the work that's not rehearsed and it's not written, so that, in essence, just me and what I do, it's always just conversational and not performative. And for example, with the gardens, whenever the gardens are talked about locally, wherever they're happening, when possible, I always like to have the gardeners be the face and voice of the work, not me. So if someone wants an interview, it's with them, not me. If someone wants a picture, it's with them and not me. So it's not about me, it's about them for that project, you know.
I was thinking of each of these in terms of questions of political theory, and what are my rights, or what is, say, the bird's rights, and how do I learn about them? Who's going to tell me the story of what my rights are, but also my opportunities? And Jenny, particularly your presentation reminded me of meeting a national park volunteer who works at the Rosie the Riveter site in Richmond, California. She's the oldest park volunteer in the country, actually, and African-American working and volunteering in this African-American community. And she said, when I wear my uniform, kids in the neighborhood say, are you a policeman? Because they've never seen a park ranger. And it's interesting in an urban environment for someone in uniform, even for myself, to have a uniform person remind me of what I can do rather than what I cannot do. And also, it reminds me also of how many signs of what I can't do are in, say, a city, like your animal estates. I mean, I've seen so many bronze plaques in New York that are this person's address, and there's the assumption that this will be that bronze plaque forever and ever. And this is a reminder that this could shift. Could we bring back this kind of, insurgency of this, bird that used to be here, or do we mourn it? I mean, it has that presence in the way that, speaking of art history, like Charles Simon's little dwelling pieces would function with these little, sort of adobe structures miniaturized in different places. And lastly, I guess your point about the last question of the bird and, whose home is this, and I was struck at how radically different that list was of, what does feel like each one reminds me of like what are rights or opportunities for either humans and or other kinds of animals, and how do I know about that?
I'm glad you used that very word, rights. And in fact, there is a tremendous amount of work right now going on, framing a lot of these issues as a rights issue. And it happened essentially, very quickly, I just mentioned this. The photograph I showed of Sarah James. Sarah and I actually went to Copenhagen together because there was a contemporary art exhibit in which I presented Sarah's work and she spoke and all of that. And we all realized that Copenhagen was a bust. It just failed and so on and so forth. A lot of people realized that. And then in Cochabamba, Evo Morales called the Mother of Right Art Conference. Fair enough, that happened. So since then, there is a lot of this framing of can the Gulf sue BP? That type of questions are being asked, rather than us as public suing BP or what have you. So there are quite a few people who have worked together. There is a book that has just come out called Rights of Mother Earth or something like that, out of the Cochabamba conference. One of the great water activists, Maud Barlow, who was just last week at the Institute, gave their annual public policy lecture. She also talked about like framing this thing as rights is becoming so necessary because anything else isn't really working. So putting all these things into a legal framework. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there is so if you just Google rights of Mother Earth, you will come across a lot of things going on. And in fact, even in the Arctic work, we are basically framing, most of the fight are becoming actually legal fights. So it's mostly becoming, framing something as rights of indigenous people, rights of this, rights of that. So yes, that's, but where we could find like, but I think that's what you guys are doing, is making these things visible, right, of me going accessing this page, which I've always probably thought is a private page or something, but yeah.
First I should just say, since you brought up the park volunteer, that I once did a talk where the Public Humanities Center where they had at Brown, where they had just had a park ranger come, and they said the park ranger said that he was doing a performance. So I think we're performing a performance essentially, and we do think of ourselves as performative. But in terms of the rights issue, yeah, I think that's a lot of what we do. But I should say that the ranger character can go both ways, right? It's also a law enforcement character, and certainly it's its history. It hasn't always been such a cheery, well-regarded, friendly figure. Park rangers they get killed by local people who wanted to, whose hunting grounds were turned into national parks. And we are definitely using the most benign version possible of the park ranger character. And we're doing that intentionally. We just sort of don't even deal with or sort of touch the more sort of law enforcement. Though we do like the idea that when we're on the Malibu beaches, we have the power of law behind us because we're rangers. Rob?
Well, that's all right. Actually, it did feel frightening for you with that rabbit hole in the background. And I'm surprised that you are saying that you didn't feel any fear yourself. But the point I wanted to make was that humor was a character trait. Don't laugh at too many times. So there's something that you might want to comment on the next art.
I think a lot of the humor also comes from nothing more than identifying the ridiculousness of the world that we live in, that we typically take for granted, the reason it's funny is because we laugh because it's like, oh yeah, we think this ridiculousness is normal. And that's where the humor comes from, and I think that's what is uniquely, it's just a byproduct of an artist recontextualizing something and taking it out of its place. For example, just with semantics and talking about redefining legal terms. Just the classification to re-identify an animal or a native urban wildlife species as a client in a place like Arup, which gives the client, if you're an architect, if you're working at Arup and you're a commercial architect or a planner on that scale, and they have 10,000 employees in 100 cities or 70 cities around the world, the term client is like the voice of God. It's like they're the people with the money that tell you what problems you're going to solve. They're in charge, and even I think it's almost important than legal terms in our capitalist society, because the client has more power in a way, because they represent, they dictate the terms of engagement, and if you have enough money, you can bend the law to suit you, you know, and that's made evident, you know, almost every day in the news. And I think for that reason, the term like client, which we don't think of very often, suddenly when you apply to an animal is hilarious, and it's tragic at the same time. And it probably wasn't apparent maybe, but in my work what I'm interested in always is experiencing at the same time a sense of hope and doom simultaneously. And I think some people look at the Animal Estates Project and they think it's just this idealistic, save the planet sort of solution-based thing. But it's not. It's also a tragic reminder of black boxes in cities that's supposed to take the place of what used to be there. So, you know, the humor, I think the humor you're pointing out is also, we're probably laughing, but we're probably also reminded of a certain sort of tragedy at the same time, maybe. I don't know. Which is, by the way, if you wanted to see the situation she was in at the beach, there's an amazing video online that shows a confrontation with the homeowner.
It's not there anymore.
Oh, it's not there? It's amazing, of a homeowner coming out and just
to the valley.
screaming at them. I mean, oh my gosh.
I mean, I love that insight, Fritz, actually, that it's making, you know, showing what's so ridiculous. I know when we're measuring out the easements, we feel like we are performing the ridiculousness of the divisions between public and private space down there. I think for me, humor is also about that a lot of these groups, one of the things that really characterizes them, and a lot of the artists now, is play and humor and having fun. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, I'm still catching up to where we are in the art world, but I think I'll go out on a limb and say I think it's one of the things that separates us from some of the traditions that were rooted in, like, guerrilla art and performance art in the 20th century, sort of since the 1960s, is that we tend to be less overtly confrontational. And much more interested in working with public agencies and things like that. And that's also a reflection of the time that we're in. That's more possible. But I think that in general, I think the tone tends to be one of sort of play, friendliness, even though we're taking on deadly serious issues.
And it's less threatening, I think, too. I mean, the fact that you have support where you have it coming from and those state agencies, and the fact that it allows you to penetrate further into real action and, you know, participate truly in what's happening, rather than this assumption like, I'm going to forever be outside screaming at the ridiculousness of this. It's like, no, I'm part of that. I am a part of that. I grew up in it, it's mine, I own it, I'm in it. I'm not screaming outside, I'm within it, bending the way I'm participating.
In the early 90s, I was lucky enough to be part of a kind of symposium in Canada dealing with acoustic guitars. And Pauline Oliveras is one of the people who was there. And I'm wondering if you're familiar with her work and her river soundings and the work that she's been doing. And then how are you incorporating sound in the work that you do?
Is either of you guys? I don't know.
No, I mean, I know that, and it's nothing I have direct experience with, really. I mean, I know when we've had, for example, working with the wildlife experts in London, and we just had, for the opening event in London, we had them come in and talking about wildlife in the city of London, for example. Our assumptions of all the things that people can do tend to be very complicated, especially when architects get involved, they want to make it complicated. But what they were saying, there's issues of light and sound. Like, turn off your lights and don't make so much noise, or something, you know, something like that. So a lot of the action isn't about doing things, it's about not doing things. It's about the absence of activity rather than the present. I think so much of humans is focused on what can I do, and if you're an architect, the more dramatic and one-off, the better. But in actuality, what a lot of these urban wildlife experts are focused on is absence, like what you don't do. Don't clean up your yard, don't make so much noise, turn off all the light, you know. And I think maybe sound goes into that, so it probably doesn't respond exactly what you're asking about, but I think it's an important component that, you know, it certainly doesn't come up as often in the visual arts, for example, which tends to be very much biased towards how things look.
Yeah. Well, I was going to actually respond to that because when I was at Dartmouth, I gave that talk, and then one of the professors in the audience asked a question that perhaps what's missing in the work is sound. And then we had a lot of discussion about that because sound is an absolutely essential and crucial element if you're talking about the art. And because we think of it as pristine, quiet, maybe sound, maybe not that much sound, but it is an incredibly rich soundscape in every season, whether it's winter blizzard or birds in the summer that literally 24 hours a day I cannot sleep because it's 24 hours light and the birds are causing hell all over. I mean the tundra, I mean loons and the cranes and the this and the that, 24 hours. So some of my friends have worked with sounds, not from an art point of view, but primarily the bird scale. But it's not even the birds, the caribou.
But
like,
anymore, the idea of the art point of view is not just visual.
Right, no, you are right.
Multifaceted.
You are absolutely
You can't
right.
really separate, say, from an art point
Well,
of
no,
view.
that-
It's there.
You are absolutely right. So I was just getting to that it is something that is missing at this point is spaces like that where sound is such a crucial element of that living thing, whether it's an animal or whatever, it's a blizzard blowing. I don't know of any work, and my work so far hasn't addressed that. It's something I don't have a background in. But it's a crucial thing.
I didn't realize so we can just do 2 or 3 more if they're kind of short. And Jill's willing to ask. Everybody's had their hand up.
I love how you've made art activism so generative, and also the language that you use in terms of footage and the way of getting inside computing reality and performance, the notion of the Trojan horse and sort of going on the Martha Stewart show, and the issue of making things visible that gets disappeared, if you will. I'm curious what you would tell the Occupy Wall Street and other Occupy activists in terms of how they might be using these kinds of art strategies to really refine the kind of political activism that they're doing.
That's actually a really interesting question. Maybe I wonder if, I mean, it just seems like the overtones of your project will almost force you to,
Yeah, it's interesting that
deal
way.
with it. I mean, without just riffing completely, not having thought about it at all, I would say lighten up, play. And particularly, you know, I went down to Occupy Wall Street, and my disappointment was that everybody looked so marginal. And I just thought, that's fine, but it's not going to play very well on TV. And you know, design programs that are going to bring in lots of regular people, you know, for the day. And bring in a lot of kids, and bring in, you know, maybe design those programs or those art events or those dances or whatever. I'm just riffing here, but
I think it also, the thing that depresses me the most about contemporary culture in every way, in politics, in art, and maybe in the way, I don't know if it's necessarily so extreme in the Occupy movement, but is this idea of us and them. And it's amazing to me the degree to which now almost pervasively across the board in every network and every news media, when they report about politics, they don't really report about what actually happened. They report on the implications for that party, on their power, their relevance, how it's going to play for them. So they don't say, this is what happened, this is how it's going to impact people. They say, this is what happened, and this is the implication it has for the right wing or for the left wing. So it's so truly bizarre, and I don't even know if we fully digested yet, but it feels like it's all an us or them dialogue about, did I win or did I lose? Did I get what I wanted or did I not? And I think the underlying principle that I'm interested in is that I want to only make work that participates, that doesn't sit back and say, like, identify what's messed up, because I think we've lived through a 20th century contemporary art world that's been based to a great extent upon passive identification of problems, which is fine, and we need that, but I think we see with younger generations of artists, we've passed that period where artists no longer view themselves merely as passive observers. And it's a very boring, tiresome position to be in, and I don't think we need that anymore. And I think the question, the great question always that comes up maybe with this kind of work is like, are you an activist or are you an artist? Number one, the idea that you should have to choose. Number two, the idea that, well, if I'm not an activist, then what am I? That means I'm passive, I'm not doing anything, which I don't think is good either. I don't know, there's all this kind of, it's a very important critical point that you bring up, and I guess just back to the Occupy movement, I think it's very exciting to see it happen. It's very exciting to see people that were invisible be visible, and to claim a place in our cities, and to take a dialogue that hasn't had, and to make it so public. But I think there's this assumption of marginalization, I think that comes up again, that reinforces the marginalization, that says, I'm on the outside, and by the way I'm going to protest is going to say I'm always going to be on the outside, rather than to say, no, this is my city, I'm a part of it, and I'm going to proceed with my work and my activity, my protest, as if I am. And that's, I think, the critical key in your work and a lot of these things that have come up, which is to proceed to enact the role that I know I have, instead of enact the role of the marginal person as the permanent marginal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know how you do that, but
I think the whole Occupy thing, one of the things is that I've been so busy this year that I didn't get to go, and then I ended up going on that November, can't remember the date, November 15th probably, just so it happens. And that was that later that night is when the day it happened when they were kicked out. And I think the movement, what it has done, again, it's a recapture of language, is that making things, invisible things visible, and with just one or two words, I think that has really got attention in a very significant manner, is this 99%. And ecology has come in. There have been multiple articles written about this whole idea of the 99% is not just humans, but the ecology. So they have recaptured some of this space. Now how this movement will play out and all that, who knows? But one of the things that struck me that night when the police came in was that they were going to cut down all of those little trees from the Zuccotti Park. So right there was a question, and I haven't been able to quite formulate that. So what is that about? So the ecology and the Occupy, there is a lot of dialogue going on. People are thinking about it. I of course don't have any advice. They are doing fine on their own, and it will evolve, or it will turn into something.
You've actually had your hand up for the longest.
Well, looking at your individual labs, I'm struck by sort of the interdisciplinary nature of each of your projects. I'm sort of wondering, especially for those of you who often have at least some sort of background in science, how you think that influences your individual art projects. Because science and art isn't necessarily something that's always immediately associated together. Sometimes in families they can put drastically. So can you speak about that and how that influences your perspective?
Well, initially when I left science from physics and other things that I was doing and got into doing eventually going back, I would resist the whole idea of science because I rejected that as a very objective thing. And one of the crucial things in my work is bringing back subjectivity, because without subjectivity we can't even raise these questions. And it's very obvious when we raise a question there are 6 answers. There is no objective truth to any of that. All of those answers are equally valid in a way. So subjectivity was crucial, so I was kind of rejecting, but as I now get older and look back all of these things, they come back. So the science is a crucial part of many of the things, whether it's in the research, might not be visible in the work, research or how we're talking about certain things, it comes back, and there is in the sort of the practices of whether it's art or a combination of the humanities, there's a lot of this art-science collaboration happening now. And it's again a combination of a lot of scientists are writing there, like James Hansen, the director of NASA, he's a writer. There are many scientists out there, but the philosophers. But there was one thing I forgot to mention is that we think of these divisions now, but going way back, 18th century, 17th century, these divisions were not there. Philosophers were scientists, and artists were philosophers, and these things were all kind of intermingling. Now we have, these fields have become so broad and huge that bringing them back together sometimes is a challenge for artists. We struggle all these various boundaries. And the public, I mean, it's not just these disciplines.
I think scientists and artists absolutely need each other. You know, I mean, if you just look at something like climate change, I mean, scientists are doing this essential research, and there's no way they're going to accomplish what they want to accomplish without artists and storytellers. Most of the students in my class are scientists and engineers, and I see it as a very practical course for them. You know, they're creating art projects, but trying to give them some sense of how they might be really fruitfully collaborate with artists when they go out there and become scientists and engineers. And we'll say, okay, you know, if you're working on coral reefs or you're working on, you know, wildlife in Africa or whatever, what can you do and what do you need artists to do, you know, in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish out of this research? And I think they've got to work with each other. And I think Princeton's a great place to actually make that happen. And it is happening here, I think. So I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions. We're really happy that you've had so many, and just really thank you so much. I have balls. So I
Yeah.